The 2026 midterms are now just a year away, and in this video, I'll be sharing with you guys my updated 2026 Senate map prediction. Republicans are coming into the midterm cycle with a 53-seat majority, and today we'll see whether or not they'll be successful in defending that majority in the upper chamber of Congress. And so we're just going to get right into it, starting off with the solid states. These are races that the Republicans or the Democrats will win by 15 percentage points or more. These races are not going to be remotely competitive. Starting off with the safe red seats, we have Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. This gives the GOP 45 seats. Remember, they only need 50 to win because they do control the vice presidency. Meanwhile, Democrats actually need 51. And now for the safe blue seats, we have just a handful. On the West Coast, we have Oregon, and in the East, we have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Delaware. So with just the safe states filled in, Republicans lead with 45, Democrats at just 38. Moving on now to the likely states, these races will be more competitive, but one candidate will still maintain a pretty clear edge. And so we'll begin with the likely Republican states, starting off down south in Texas, where incumbent Republican Senator John Cornyn is running for re-election to a fifth term. His Democratic challenger will likely be Colin Allred, the Democratic nominee in 2024, who lost to Ted Cruz by 8.5 points. And looking at the polling between Cornyn and Allred, the incumbent senator leads by 5.5 points. Republicans should expect to win this race pretty easily, probably by around 10. Colin Allred is not a very strong candidate, and John Cornyn is significantly more popular than Ted Cruz in Texas. I mean, look at 2018. This was when Democrats performed very well with Beto O'Rourke as the Democratic nominee. Ted Cruz only won by 2, but with Colin Allred as the challenger, Cruz won by a whopping 8.5 points. Texas is not going to be competitive in 2026. Republicans are going to take the seat. Next up, in Alaska, we have another incumbent Republican running for re-election. This time, it's Dan Sullivan seeking a third term. His challenger will likely be Mary Peltola, who was a member of the House for 2 years, elected in 2022, and then lost in 2024. And looking at the polls, Dan Sullivan leads by 3%, although these are polls that are funded by Democratic groups. If you look at this Data for Progress poll, ultimately, Dan Sullivan is going to win by a wider margin. In 2020, he was reelected against Al Gross by nearly 13 points. Alaska is not going to be nearly as competitive as the polling average might suggest. The state will also be likely red. Moving up now to the Midwest, we'll begin in Iowa, where incumbent Republican Joni Ernst is not running for re-election. She is wildly unpopular in her home state and likely would have made this race even more competitive if she had actually run. She won by just 6 points as the incumbent in 2020. Instead, it is going to be Ashley Hinson who will likely be the Republican nominee. She's a current member of Congress, and she will likely become the next U.S. Senator elected from the state of Iowa. If we look at the polling before Ernst dropped out, she was winning by 4%. With a better candidate now on the ballot, this race is going to go to Republicans by around a 10-point margin. There's no doubt they're going to hold on to Iowa, the third likely red state on our map. Next up, in Ohio, the new incumbent Senator John Husted is running for re-election. He will likely be challenged by Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown served in the U.S. Senate representing Ohio for 3 terms until he lost in 2024 to Bernie Moreno by 3.6%. Polling data suggests that he will now lose by around the same margin, although ultimately, now that Sherrod Brown is no longer the incumbent, John Husted is probably going to win by a larger margin. Democrats are not going to take Ohio back. The state will be likely Republican. And before we continue, I have a message from our sponsor. In returning to the map, we have one final likely red state, and that is going to be Florida, where Ashley Moody is on track to win a full term. She was appointed earlier this year to fill the vacancy left by Marco Rubio, who became Secretary of State. Republicans have performed incredibly well in Florida Senate races in the last few years. In 2024, Rick Scott won re-election by 13 points, and in 2022, Marco Rubio won by a whopping 16. Now, as a non-elected incumbent, Ashley Moody will probably not perform as well as her Republican counterparts, but she will likely win by a double-digit margin nonetheless. Florida will be likely red, and this will give the GOP 50 seats with their solid and likely states now filled in. And now turning our attention back to the Democrats, we're going to look at the states that they will win by 5 to 15 points. Starting out west with Colorado and New Mexico. In Colorado, John Hickenlooper will be reelected to a second term, and in New Mexico, it will be Ben Ray Lujan, also reelected to a second term. These states will both be likely blue. And then in Illinois, Dick Durbin will be retiring from the U.S. Senate. He's been serving in the upper chamber of Congress since 1997. He will not run for a sixth term. He is the current majority whip, serving right under Chuck Schumer in Senate Democratic leadership. And ultimately, it will likely be Raja Krishnamurthy who will replace him as the nominee at the top of the ticket, and he will likely become the newest U.S. Senator from Illinois. So Illinois will still be blue, but the margin will not be as big as it would have been if Durbin was still on the ballot. And as we move on eastward, we're going to hit New Hampshire. We have a very interesting race in the Granite State where Jeanne Shaheen is not running for re-election. She won by 16 points in 2020. Without her on the ballot, this race is going to be more competitive. And so on the Democratic side, we have Chris Pappas, a current member of Congress. On the Republican side, up until just a few months ago, it was supposed to be Scott Brown, a former U.S. Senator who served Massachusetts as a Republican, which is very impressive, until he lost to Elizabeth Warren. And so Scott Brown is losing in the polls right now by an average of 12% against Pappas, but he will likely actually not end up being the nominee. It's probably going to be John Sununu, a member of the Sununu family who is very powerful and very popular in the state, and John Sununu will probably be the Republican nominee. He will probably fare better against Chris Pappas, but currently, based on the numbers, I have New Hampshire as likely blue, although this is certainly a state to watch, especially after Sununu jumps into the race. John Sununu is also a former U.S. Senator. He served from 2003 to 2009, and so with his entry into the race, we have a lot to look out for in New Hampshire, and of course, we'll keep you guys updated on that. But for now, based on what we're seeing, New Hampshire is barely going to make it into the likely blue category. And then in New Jersey, Cory Booker is on track to win re-election, but the margin's probably going to be a little smaller just because of how much more Republican the state has become. In 2024, Kamala Harris wins New Jersey by just 6 points, whereas 4 years ago, Joe Biden won it by 16. New Jersey is not the solid blue state it once was, and that is why we will only place it into the likely category. And then in Virginia, we have Mark Warner running for re-election. He will likely win. He was first elected 16 years ago, and according to the polling data, he's on track to win a fourth term. Mark Warner leads by 7% against Glenn Youngkin, although we don't even know for sure if Youngkin is running. There's a good chance he doesn't, and instead will eye the presidency in 2028, but he's the most viable Republican candidate, and so at this point, it does seem like Mark Warner is on track for a win. But if Glenn Youngkin does jump into the race, the election will be significantly more competitive. But for now, Virginia will be the final likely blue state on our map. And so this is it. We have just the 6 most competitive races left. They will all be decided by margins of less than 5. And we'll begin with the lean Republican states. Lean states are categorized by margins of 1 to 5%. They're very competitive, could reasonably go either way, but one candidate still does have a very slight edge. And so we'll begin on the Republican side with Nebraska, where Pete Ricketts is running for re-election to a full term. He's being challenged by Dana Osborne, an independent candidate who ran in 2024 against Deb Fischer and came reasonably close to winning, losing by just 7 points. Meanwhile, Ricketts won by 25 in his special election. And so looking at the polling data, it is very close. It's actually a tie with both candidates at 46%. However, this is mainly due to the fact that the polls have been funded by Democratic sources. In reality, Pete Ricketts is doing slightly better. It is going to be a close and competitive race, but ultimately, as the Republican incumbent, I would be very surprised if Ricketts lost this election. So Nebraska will still be placed into the lean Republican category. Even though Osborne will do well, especially for an independent, it is going to be extremely difficult for him to actually win. Next up, in Michigan, incumbent Democrat Gary Peters is not seeking re-election, which means we have another very exciting open seat and possibly the best opportunity for Republicans to flip a seat next year. And so Gary Peters won by just 1.7% in 2020. That likely factored into his reasoning for dropping out. And so instead, Mallory McMorrow, a current member of the Michigan State Senate, is on track to be the Democratic nominee. It's not confirmed, but she is the current frontrunner. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Mike Rogers is set to be the nominee. He's already received the endorsement of President Trump, and he ran in 2024 when he lost by less than half a point to Democrat Alyssa Slotkin in a race where Republicans were expected to lose by 6 to 7%. And so he is a very strong candidate. He's a former member of the House of Representatives, and he will likely win this race based on what we're seeing right now, with him up by 4 points in the polling average against McMorrow. Michigan will be lean red. This is the first flip on the map, and again, the best opportunity for Republicans to steal a seat from the Democrats. And now moving on to the lean blue states, we'll begin up in Minnesota, where Tina Smith is not running for re-election. She will likely be replaced by Peggy Flanagan, the current lieutenant governor of Minnesota, who will be challenged by Royce White, who ran in 2024 against Amy Klobuchar. The race is going to be competitive, but ultimately Democrats are the favorites here in Minnesota. Tim Walz is also running for re-election as governor to a third term. Democrats are probably not going to lose the seat, although it will be a race to watch. And then the final lean state on this map will be the Tar Heel state of North Carolina, where Thom Tillis, the incumbent Republican, is not running for re-election. And this is the best opportunity for Democrats to flip a seat. Thom Tillis defeated Cal Cunningham by 1.7% in 2020. It was a surprise because just a month before the election, he was supposed to lose by 10 points. The issue for Democrats is that at that point, Cal Cunningham was exposed for cheating on his wife, who later divorced him. And so Thom Tillis really only won because of a scandal on the Democrats' side. He was not popular. He was not going to win re-election. And so instead, Republicans are going to go with Michael Whatley, the former chair of the RNC. Meanwhile, Democrats are going with Roy Cooper, the very popular two-term governor of North Carolina. This is a strong pick on the Democrat side, and that is why Roy Cooper leads by just under 5 points in the polls, although Michael Whatley is a strong candidate in his own right. And so I do expect this race to get a lot more competitive as people get to know Michael Whatley better. But for now, Roy Cooper is the favorite, and the Tar Heel state will be the final lean state on the map, and currently it is expected to go in favor of the Democrats. And so now we have just 2 elections remaining, Georgia and Maine. Georgia is always among the last races we go over, but Maine, it's surprising to see Maine up so late. But we're going to begin down in the Peach State, where Jon Ossoff is running for re-election. He was first elected in 2021, defeating David Perdue in a runoff by a margin of 1.2%. This is one of the races that gave Joe Biden Senate control when he was elected 5 years ago. And today, Jon Ossoff will be running up against Mike Collins. Mike Collins is a former trucker and a current member of Congress who has received the endorsement of President Trump. So he's very likely to be the Republican candidate. And looking at the polling data, this race just keeps getting closer and closer, from Ossoff +5 to +4 and now to +3. This is going to be one of the closest races in the country. Mike Collins is going to give Jon Ossoff a run for his money. Right now, we do see Ossoff ahead, but this race is going to tighten up even more. And so Georgia will be tilt blue, with Democrats at a very marginal advantage for now. And these tilt races, of course, are defined by margins of 1 percentage point or less. And finally, in Maine, Susan Collins, the incumbent Republican who's been in the Senate for 30 years, will likely run for a 6th term. And her challenger this time is probably going to be Janet Mills, the governor of Maine. She indicated just a few days ago that she will be seeking the Democratic nomination, and she will very likely win it. And looking at Susan Collins' results from 5 years ago, she defeated Sarah Gideon by 8.6% when almost every single poll showed her losing. The polling average was something like Gideon +5. It was a huge upset, and Susan Collins was able to stay on for another 6 years. And in 2026, she is less popular than she was before, but she still did win by 8% in 2020. And so this is going to be a very close race. We have a 5-term incumbent running against the incumbent governor, but for now, given Susan Collins's huge incumbency advantage, the race is going to be tilt Republican. We'll have a better picture of how this race is going to play out when we get new polling data now that Mills has entered the race. But for now, this is where the map stands. Republicans at 53 seats, Democrats at 47. This is my updated 2026 Senate map prediction, with Republicans flipping Michigan and Democrats flipping North Carolina. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like the video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which races you're watching, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content just like this leading up to the midterms next year.